So I'm going to be talking about microservices from the 30,000 foot view, basically the big sort of top-down view, if you like. I've done this talk a few times before. You might have seen it different names. I've called it the business behind microservices and a few other different names as well. But fundamentally, it's looking at the organizational, architectural, and operations side of microservices. Very brief case study at the end as well with Nick Jackson from notonthehighstreet.com, who are a fantastic company and we worked with quite a bit. But primarily, it's about sort of an introductory or more overview, more business and people-focused view of microservices too. So when I talk about business to tech people, when I'm a tech person myself, I'm a Java developer by trade, people think of fluffiness. The business is fluffiness, yeah? And when I say microservices, they're thinking micro-fluffiness? Any Star Trek geeks loving the tribbles, yeah? But it's really important, this stuff. And I think microservices is kind of like with the combination of containers, it's a genuine revolution in our industry that we as technologists can use to drive a lot of good change. I think if done right, microservices can profoundly impact the way we deliver valuable software. Massively broad statement, totally conscious we've said this about Agile, SOA, and DevOps. The snag is, with Agile, it became very much a project management fest, yeah? Scrum, Kanban, all good things, but we forgot the technical side to Agile, XP being a classic. SOA became a bit of a vendor fest. The vendors got in, we tried to over-standardize things, and DevOps is in danger of becoming a tooling fest as well. So what I'm trying to pitch here really is we need, as technologists, to think holistically, yeah? These days, IT isn't a cost center. We need to actively contribute to the business and help them drive strategy, yeah? So I'll start with a bit of a story. OpenCredo, much like the classic Agile Manifesto days of yore, we went on a skiing trip, company retreat. Actually, to be honest, we haven't got much money, so it was more like this. But nonetheless, we went and had a good old chat at the end of the day, and we kind of come up with this. And I'm very conscious, I'm very dangerous doing manifestos, not trying to do a manifesto, but we value these things. Over the past, say we've been in business 7 years, over the past 7 years, we've come to value these things as we've been helping companies deliver software. Products over projects, we like small cross-functional teams, we like services, we were doing services before it was called microservices, we like goal-driven technical leadership, we like continuous deployment, and we like people, fundamentally, yeah? And we kind of broke it down into organizational, architecture, and kind of dev operational type aspects of microservices. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 30 minutes or so, okay? This is me, quick shameless plug. If you want to tweet at me, I love getting on Twitter, I'm all over that kind of stuff. My background is Java development, doing a bit of Go these days, a bit of microservices. I get involved in the community, I love to share knowledge, I love to learn from other people. So I write for InfoQ, DZone, O'Reilly, a few other places, and I'm involved in the London Java community as well. So that's enough of that. So organization, who's heard of Conway's law here? Ah, lovely, most people say. Conway's law basically says your software will look like the organization. Yeah, or your organization will look like software. So if you have silos, if you have dev, ops, QA, these kind of things, that's how you get software moving through your business. If you have sort of teams that are only focused on one area of the business, you will get software that's only one area of the business. And they won't talk to the next area of the business, that kind of thing. So be very careful of this thing. Conway's law, over the last few years, has been a classic microservices bingo thing. If you go to a microservices conference, you're going to hear Conway's law. And the corollary of Conway's law is that we need to think cross-functionally. To deliver maximum value, we need to be put into teams where we have all the skills needed to deliver value to customers. And that includes developing good software, that also includes sometimes not developing software as well. That's a valid choice. But Spotify, Amazon, Gilt, yes, they're unicorns, but they are driving the way. I think we can all learn something from them, yeah? Spotify came to cross-functional teams through culture. Amazon, the famous two-pizza team, they, rather than have a team of 100 people and maintain 99 communication links, they have teams of 12. You only need to maintain communication, maintain a relationship with 11 other people, that kind of thing. Gilt did it around strategic alignment. Gilt wanted to give their teams high-level goals, high-level KPIs, key performance indicators, and high-level kind of levers. And Gilt, the architecture naturally emerged into microservices. Yeah? The teams were incentivized to deliver value to customers. They had a chat with their sort of operations team, and microservices just emerged. Now they're sharing a lot of cool stuff, Gilt, now about how they've done those kind of things. So cross-functional teams where you have ops, dev, QA, project managers, the whole thing in one team delivering business value, super, super useful. A word of caution though. So how many of you would say you work in enterprise companies? Big-ish companies, yeah. There's a few there. So be careful, because traditional enterprises are very much what we call divided companies. This is a great book. Now, divided companies are different than, say, connected companies. One is not better than the other. The book kind of pictures that this may be the way forward, but it's just a reality of the situation. Traditional enterprises, it can be command and control. To the sheer size of things, we have to do things like specialised division of labour, but they're very good in stable environments. Yeah? The only snag is, this is the realm of Six Sigma, ESBs, and classical SOA. So this stuff is good technology, somewhat abused sometimes, but it's very different than the technology we see in connected companies. Now these are more the nimble, kind of startup forward thinkers. There are often high degrees of autonomy within these companies. Think of autonomy, purpose, and mastery from Daniel Pink's Drive, that kind of thing. And they're great in uncertain environments. And now a lot of our markets that we operate in are quite uncertain. So things like Agile, Lean, REST, microservices, this is the domain of these kind of connected companies. Now, if you are an enterprise, you can look at becoming more connected. Amazon do that pretty much. But you need to be cautious about how you do it. Yeah? Now, Simon Wardley talks about this a lot. There's a big buzz at the moment by Gartner called Bi-Modal IT. I'm not sure if people have heard of Bi-Modal IT, but effectively it means having two speeds of operation within your company. Systems of record, kind of your transactional systems, and systems of engagement, your forward-facing user systems. And you have different teams with different specialities. Now, this is a bit dangerous because it creates effectively a two-party system in your organization. So be wary of that. Plenty of good reading around Simon's blog there. He actually proposes a model called pioneers, settlers, and town planners. So if you're looking to introduce things into your organization, the pioneers with certain specialities are best to prototype it. Once they've done their thing, you hand off to people who are more skill sets aligned with what he calls settlers and these kind of things. So rather than a two-step bimodal approach, he proposes a more gradual introduction. And he also suggests that no one-size-fits-all in terms of Agile, Lean, and Six Sigma. They've all got value depending on the context. Yeah? So these are things that we at OpenCredo have come to value. And I won't launch on this long due to time, but the slides are already online. I'll share them again at the end. But these are things from an organization. We like small teams. We like products over projects. We like user impact over requirements. We like creating verifiable incremental value as well to customers, rather than just adding features. Yeah? If anyone's doing some stuff like classic is online banking, they just keep adding more features, and a lot of their features don't work as it is. So I'd rather they fix their features first rather than add more. And we like doing transformation, but very incremental. Identify goals, organizational goals, technology goals, move towards them gradually. Fast feedback learning is what we optimize for. So architecture is super, super important with microservices. Architecture and microservices, they're pretty much the same thing in terms of microservices are an architectural pattern. Yeah. So Simon Bryant has this great quote. He talks about microservices. He said, if you can't build a well-structured monolith, what makes you think microservices are the answer? Now, I imagine Simon dropping the mic and walking off the stage when he says this. Yeah. This is really valuable. Architectural skills are super important regardless of what mode of operation you're working in, be it microservices, be it monoliths. And the danger, if you've got this monolith thing here, you've got, say, SOA, like right at the end there, maybe there's something in the middle that we should be aiming for. The danger is if you don't get the architecture thing quite right, you effectively end up carving up bad things, yeah? And this is not my slide, this is Alvaro's. I've got to shout out Alvaro Sanchez, great presentation. I use this a lot for cheap laughs, but it's a great slide. Think about these things, really important, yeah? And architecture and design skills, like two very famous companies, Etsy, like they're the US version, the not so good version of non-high street presenting, yeah? They're an online $1 billion market cap, $1 billion revenue, and Stack Exchange powers Stack Overflow. Who knows about Stack Overflow in this room? Yeah? So these are both famous monoliths, yeah? Etsy runs a PHP monolith, and they've invested a lot in architecture, invested a lot in DevOps as well, and Stack Exchange runs a C#.NET monolith. Yeah, they run it on crazy powerful web servers. They've got HA proxy at the front clustering. Got a few little services there, Redis, Elasticsearch, some other stuff. Some meaty Microsoft MS SQL databases in the back end. But these are, making a lot of money, serving a lot of requests, running as well-architected monoliths. Think about that for a second. Well-architected monoliths, making lots of money. So there's no reason we can't do good stuff with monoliths, yeah. Guilt, I bang on about Guilt a lot, but they are an awesome company. Like, if ever you get a chance to see Guilt talk at presentations, please do, because they're really cool. But they talk about these things that have led to the emergence of microservices. It wasn't like we must do microservices, which we are seeing in some companies now. Not always a bad thing, but sometimes not so appropriate. Guilt, they basically define their values. What as an organization do we value? We like team autonomy. We want voluntary, kind of natural selection of tooling and techniques, these kind of things. We want KPIs and goal-driven initiatives and failing fast and openly, being open and honest even when it's difficult. That's really hard, really hard. My architecture, for me, is about technical leadership, communication, empathy, and just enough upfront design. They're the four, I should say, key things. I take a lot of my cues from Simon Brown, who I've mentioned already. Awesome book there, check it out, it's a Lean Pub book. And Pat Kua, another awesome book there, Pat's from ThoughtWorks. I met him at a few conferences, he's an awesome guy. But architecture used to be about, we do the UML, we hand you off boxes and you as developers build. And I used to hate that, as a developer, I didn't like that. I, want to get involved in the business, I want to get involved in creating the solution. So for me, we can all do the architecture role, but it's about technical leadership, and we need to get better as technologists at communicating risks, communicating shared understanding, these kind of things. And we need to be a bit empathic, I think, Think about users, think about your fellow developers, think about operations, these kind of things. And shameless plug again, I did a talk at CraftConf a few months back called Empathy, the Hidden Ingredient of Good Software Development. So feel free to have a Google for that one. I think empathy is super important. I take my cues from Jeff Sussner, who's written a book called Designing Delivery, which is awesome. Might have it in the slides later on. But Jeff and other people that have thought about this stuff more than I have started talking about these things as really important to developing and delivering effective software. Just enough upfront design is really important. We'll come on to that a bit later with microservices. It's a slightly different thing, but these are the things we think microservices. Like when someone asked me earlier on, actually in the keynote, about how do you carve up a monolith, and you have to find seams effectively. You have to split your domain, split your architecture. And we use things like domain-driven design. So reading there's the blue book and the red book, both really good books. And the red book's a bit more modern, Vernon Vaughan, I think it is, and then Eric Evans on the blue book. You can do a Google and find them, they're good books. We also use things like Adam Tornahill's work, where this city is actually a visual representation of architecture. Now the city blocks, the size is actually the size of, I think this is a Java app, so it's like packages, classes, these kind of things. And the color is the temporal rate of change. So you look at git commit logs and see the churn of code in those code bases. And basically, like the areas that are big and dark are areas you don't go. Pretty much, or you do go quite a lot because they're churning quite a bit, but you don't want to go. In the analogies, it looks a bit like a city. These places are like your gentrified hipster areas, and these places are like your slums or ghettos. That's the kind of analogy. Like it doesn't always work for everyone, but that's the analogy that they're pitching. But it's really interesting to get an understanding of your code base. So this is your monolith. You might think, well, these are there's a lot of change going on over here, and these are complicated. These are big big areas of code. Same here. Maybe we want to chunk those out as microservices first, or maybe we actually want to leave them till last. But it's nice to have the information so you can make an informed choice. Make sense? So Your Code is a Crime Scene, awesome book, Adam Tornahill. He's done TED Talks, he's done some really cool talks, really interesting guy, deep thinker. Measuring toxicity is a really good way of understanding where you're at from an architecture point of view. Standardize what matters. Now, Sam Newman, author of the Microservice book, talks about this a lot. With microservices, you should be standardizing the glue and the infrastructure. Standardizing what's in between the services, rather than standardizing the services themselves. And I'll say that again, because that for me is super, super important. Don't worry about standardizing what's in the microservice. Worry about the microservice system. Make sense? Like both myself and Michael mentioned, polyglot things are cool. You haven't really got to worry. You worry to some degree in terms of if someone builds a service and then leaves, you've got to maintain that service probably. But in terms of the bigger picture, it's much more important defining how microservices communicate, how they're monitored, how they're deployed, all these things. The glue and infra is really important. There is some patterns. I think this is what are they called? Names escaped me. There's a great article on this website that talks about several patterns of change, patterns of moving to a microservices architecture. So, InnoQ, sorry, yes, so fellow consultants they're from Germany. InnoQ do some amazing work. So if you go to that bit.ly link there, you'll see some patterns for architectural styles of breaking down monoliths to microservices. A key thing with microservices is designing for replaceability. It's the key thing. Managers sometimes don't like this. What? You're going to design and then replace it? Code is not the asset. Dan North talks about that. code is actually a liability to some degree, yeah? You want to optimize for creating business value. So if you can build something, throw it away next week, and it's solved and it's served its purpose, that is good, yeah? We need to educate, I think, some of the middle managers that replacing things is not always bad. We do it anyway, we're constantly fixing tech debt and stuff, but it can be more obvious with microservices. Microservices as a unit of replacement is much, if you get the boundaries right, it's much easier to swap things in and swap things out. James talks about this. He calls it systems that are never done. Any Terry Pratchett fans will recognize the family's axe, where the handle changes and the blade changes over time, but it's still the same axe, that kind of thing. And that's a microservice system. Many things can change over time, but it's still a microservice system. Sam talks a lot. I'm sure many of you have seen Sam Newman's book, the Microservices book. Great book as well. It talks about architectural safety. Bit of SimCity references. Any SimCity fans? Is really kind of cool. So a word of caution, I mentioned this in the keynote, evaluation is a super, super important skill. There's microservice frameworks, there's container technology, a whole bunch of stuff. And us as developers and architects means we've really got to work hard at evaluating what we bring into our stack these days, yeah? I want to share with you a quote on architecture. And it says, "I'll postpone using this shiny new framework until my peers have validated the proposed benefits with rigorous scientific experiments." Now this was of course said by no programmer, ever. I'm sure you are. I'm guilty of charge, yeah. I like the shiny. I was on Docker when it was pre 1.0, that kind of stuff. But this is dangerous, yeah. Like, I work as a consultant. A lot of times we get brought in and we start, peeling back the stack, and it's a whole bunch of crazy things going on in there because people have come in, thought that's the best thing at the time, but there's no record of why they've kind of chosen these things, and it makes our jobs quite hard sometimes. So do ever think, lots of shiny technology around microservices, but more important are the architectural principles than the frameworks in my mind. The frameworks are super cool as well. So architectural values, I'll let you have a quick read there while I get a quick drink of water. These are some of the things we value. Multiple cohesive services rather than like one big thing. Bounded context, we like the idea from domain-driven design. We like the modeling behind domain-driven design. Context mapping is a really valuable technique we're getting more and more on. We like autonomous goal-driven leadership rather than kind of anarchy or command and control. Often we swing between the two, like free-for-all, or the leader says exactly what goes. We like autonomous goal-driven leadership. And we like implementing signals and performance indicators to check that we're on track. From an architectural standpoint, we use things like Sonar Cube, or various Ruby tools we've used, and we like using things like Adam Tornahill's measures of toxicity, that kind of thing. So 4, operations. Automate everything except the people. We know when we automate the people, it doesn't end well. Yeah, I think we all agree with that. I'm a big fan of Terminator. There is macro operational impact of microservices. Yeah, so Martin Fowler said it better than I will. You must be this tall to use microservices. He said these are the prerequisites, I can never say it, prerequisites for implementing microservices. Rapid provisioning, basic monitoring, rapid application deployment. We have seen this time and time again in companies we work with. These are essential, yeah. In a nutshell, it's the kind of technical parts of DevOps, because DevOps in itself is, I think, just as much about the culture, just as much about sort of working together as a team, but the technical parts in terms of continuous integration, continuous delivery, programmable infrastructure. Having a good build pipeline, super, super important. I've talked about this at Java 1 last year, so some of the things we've struggled with is developing locally, for example, on microservices. Now, we use service virtualization quite a bit, so shout out to some colleagues back home around Specto Labs and a tool called Hoverfly. It's an open source service virtualization tool. But developing locally, when you have one monolith, was much easier. You fire up the monolith locally on your laptop, you start developing against it. When you've got, say, a system with 100 microservices, and you might be dependent on, say, 10 of them when you're developing something, how do you test against those things? How do you actually build against those things? So techniques like service virtualization, or what we call production in a box, are quite useful as well. So I think the video is even online now. So this is a link to the blog post. I think I've linked off to the video as well, so you can check that one out. We've talked about that. Again, it's me talking, but it's all my OpenCredo colleagues pouring in all the good knowledge to me. So it's me talking, but it's teamwork effort, basically. We have some great conversations in OpenCredo around the things we're learning. Fundamentally with operations, it's automate all the things. We say if we're going into a client and say they've got a monolith and no pipeline, the first thing we would typically do is build a pipeline. build a pipeline from dev to production, yeah, and get like a Hello World service online, online and running in production. If you don't, we often find in our past experience we've built things out, and then when we start to put the pipeline in, loads of technical and organizational issues pop up. Suddenly, Jane says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in charge of change control. You can't deploy here." Bob suddenly says, "Oh, that's my area of the system. You can't deploy things onto this." So by automating, by building a build pipeline from development to production as early as possible, you drive out all those issues. You go and chat to Jane earlier on. You go and chat to Bob. You go and make sure there's no sort of firewall issues, these kind of things, yeah? Getting an automated pipeline, because with microservices, you're deploying more and more things. With a monolith, it was pretty much one thing, yeah, and some data stores. With microservices, lots and lots of services probably going into production. The sooner we drive out the pain, the quicker we learn, the faster we learn. So once you've automated things, that's quite a generic statement, I'm happy to talk more about that later, but once we've automated all the things, then it's all about running things. And typically, in the middle and the end, there's lots of problems, and when we see problems, people are involved in the mix. And when people are involved, you want to be this guy, kicking back with a beer, knowing what's going on, but, not panicking, yeah, is the key thing. So we like a lot Dickerson's hierarchy of reliability. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's seen the O'Reilly Google book with the SRE, Site Reliability Engineering book, very cool book. Not for everyone, I would caveat that it's Google, so they run at a different scale than most of us, but they've actually put this in their book now. So this is kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yeah? And the story comes out of this is Mikey Dickerson went in to fix healthcare.gov. So do people know about healthcare.gov? Like in the US, they have to buy health insurance, for example, so it's not like NHS over here. And there was President Obama built his campaign around this. They were building this big system. They had 50 contractors contributing to building healthcare.gov. It went live and it fell over straight away. And it took them over 6 weeks to get it back up and running in a stable way. And in the end, they had to bring in a crack team. So Mikey Dickerson, Nori Heikkinen, like from Google, from Amazon, they went and basically, the president pretty much said, get me the best people in the US to fix this thing. So this crack team of people came in and they helped stand up healthcare.gov. And one of the first things they did, they walked into the development pool and Mikey looked around and he saw all this kind of crazy stuff going on. The website was constantly crashing, constantly coming back up, constantly crashing. And Mikey said, how do you guys know what state the application's in? Where's he kind of monitoring? And someone nervously looked up from their monitor and pointed to a monitor in the corner of the room. And Mikey's like, awesome, they probably got Nagios, got some monitoring going on. And he looked over and it was actually a TV with CNN on. And when it crashed, CNN reported it, they'd go and reboot the database. I've heard that story too much for it not to be true, I think. I've met Mikey once. But that's crazy. Yeah? But the first thing he did was get basic monitoring, as we said with Martin Fowler stuff, basic monitoring in. After you've got basic monitoring, after you've got those monitors, those information radiators, it's then all about the people. Yeah, basic monitoring, it's all about the people. How do you handle this? How do you respond to how do you respond to incidents? How do you deal with blameless post-mortems? Apparently, before Mikey arrived, there was lots of finger pointing. Oh, you've broken this, you've broken that. 50 contractors, 50 contract companies in the room. No one wanted to take responsibility. So Mikey introduced a rule straight away that you cannot talk in a post-mortem unless you are contributing something or promising to fix it. Instantly, silence in the room. Yeah, but he basically worked with them and then they fixed it together. So this came out of it. The SRE book is a great book to read. I went to a DevOps Enterprise Summit last week and people were talking about it. And I would just caveat, it is a fantastic book to read, but it's about Google, and Google do things very opinionated in my experience. They are awesome and they're ahead of most of us, but I try to read the Google stuff and take away what I can from it. I don't blindly copy Google. We say that's cargo culting. If you copy things without understanding why you're copying them, you don't really know the principles or the values that led to those decisions. So be really careful about copying people like Google. They do some really cool stuff, but not all of us are running at Google scale or have Google's problems, for example. But some of the stuff we can learn a lot. And this, for me, basic monitoring, all about the people, super, super important. Right, so failing to prepare is preparing to fail, basically. So a lot of companies now are practicing failure for real. So they're running game days, disaster and recovery sessions, actually doing real-life chaos monkey. Google actually do this. Google go into their data centers and literally pull out cables. Now, if there is a user impact, apparently they put the cables back in very fast. But fundamentally, they actually go in and they see, do the right people get paged? How do people react to problems going wrong? And in microservices, often failures can cascade if you're not careful. So practicing these things, really important, not just through Chaos Monkey, but real life simulate disasters, simulate it in working hours rather than 3 a.m. in the morning when the pages are going off. Accountability, this is one thing that gets me a little bit. Knowing who's responsible, so RASCI is responsible, accountable, supporting, consulted, and informed. It's a very classic old school project management technique, but I think it's really valuable. Many people I chat to in organizations don't know what they're responsible for, don't know what they're accountable for, don't know who to inform when things are changed. Yeah? So if Jane owns the infrastructure and I want to change the database, I need to chat to Jane, that kind of thing. Basic stuff, but it often goes under the radar. So things like RASCI are really valuable. Things like checklists are also really valuable as well. We found these things as helpful processes, and we like to do behavior-driven design sort of across the system via APIs, individual services, to prevent regressions. In a microservice system, it's very easy to change something and break other things. So we like doing these things. Don't forget about the utilities like security and scalability. Things like ZAP, BDD security are great for enforcing security stuff at the actual in the build pipeline. ZAP comes from the OWASP. Hopefully many of you have heard of OWASP, the top 10 security vulnerabilities. And BDD security is a BDD-like wrapper over ZAP. JMeter for performance testing, or Gatling, take your pick. But testing these things in the pipeline is super important. Personally, 5 years ago on a project where I wasn't testing performance, we had a major issue. But we didn't know the performance of each service, and one of them was going down, 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 until one day it hit the critical kind of level, and the whole application ground to a halt, and we had a real hard time figuring out what service was causing those problems. Things like Brendan Gregg's use methodology, like when you've got problems, checking utilization, saturation, and errors. It's actually, after I've read it, it's obvious and it's a bit of a no-brainer, but until I read this article, I was like, I was a bit ad hoc in some of my diagnostic approaches to production failures. So Brendan Gregg's Netflix guy, super, super good at Linux and all this kind of stuff. He is a real deep thinker. I think we can all learn from his sort of ideas on how to fix production issues. In a microservice system as well, you're going to have lots of things going on and probably lots of redundancy. So you can have maybe multiple services, load balanced, you're going to have multiple data stores, all these things. So we might need to switch to symptom-based monitoring as opposed to technical diagnostics. So the fact that one service is crashed might actually be no big deal. There might be no business impact, no user impact. But our system, we didn't call it a microservice system, one of my first systems I worked on, which was kind of microservice-like, we had Nagios, and we were alerting on Amazon on all the individual instances failing and coming back up. And it was just chaos. Nagios was kicking off all these things, but the actual application was smooth sailing. Things just crashed, they died, we brought them back up automatically, all this good stuff. So we then switched to symptom-based monitoring using our BDD journey, saying, if at any time in this e-commerce system I cannot search for products, browse for products, add them to my basket, and check out. If any of those things go wrong, I'm losing money. We need to fix that. Other things like the recommendation thing breaking, no big deal. Maybe pictures on the on the product's not so broken. But I think in microservices we need to switch to symptom-based monitoring as opposed to individual technical issues. Okay. Operational values. So these are the things we value in terms of operational kind of and DevOps type of things. We like designing for failure. Hystrix, those kind of things, circuit breakers, timeouts, retries, bulkheads. So Hystrix, data wires, stuff, Quark, all that kind of thing. Independent, automated, continuous deployment is really important rather than big bangs. You cannot do big bangs in a microservice system. If you are doing big bangs in a microservice system, what you're actually deploying is a distributed monolith. So think of that one. Programmable infrastructure, we really like that. Things like HashiCorp's Terraform, great stuff. Ansible, take your pick of Chef, all these kind of things as well. Again, it's all about the people. Once you've got the basic things in, it's all about the people. That's life in general, but in particular operations, it's all about people. So we like symptom-driven monitoring. It's much easier to fix stuff that we know is causing business impact than random things failing and coming up and down. Monitoring in microservices, adding containers is hard. I'll tell you that. We've learned a lot with our clients on this stuff. It's hard. Very brief bit of change management, then I'm going to quickly move on to the case study. So change management is essential. I am a techie at heart, but I'm getting more into the business stuff these days. There's lots to learn from books like HBR, Harvard Business Review. We as technologists have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, a lot of accountability these days. So knowing some things that have been solved in the management world already is actually really valuable. Things like if you're doing a transformation, you're bringing in DevOps, bringing in microservices, knowing about fair process, engaging with people, explaining and setting expectations, super, super important. I see as a consultant, I see a lot of people at the explaining stage stage, they haven't engaged with people, and they haven't set expectations yet. So we work with people to make sure everyone knows what's expected. This is what DevOps means. This is what the benefits of microservices are. We engage with the relevant people. That's us, developers in the trenches. That often gets forgotten sometimes. And we make sure that transformation, like leading change, is a process. It's an evolution, yeah? It can't be decreed from on high. Definitely not anymore. We need to communicate, plan, evaluate, constantly learn. Optimize for feedback, optimize for learning. And I said it already, but it's about empowering. I don't always like that word, because empowerment seems to mean that I give you power, but it's about empathy. It's about, shared understanding, shared responsibility, and thinking of other people, yeah. So, a little joke, I really do like empathy. And I think as technologists, sometimes we're a bit too quick to judge. And I saw this tweet a while ago, and I just thought, this like sums up what I see, like in terms of, some people. I looked, I was like, that's harsh. Oh, that's true. Oh, yeah. But like, I see it. Replace like, guy with like person and like QA person, versus dev. Like, I think often from a developer's perspective, and I'm like, oh, that QA person, and that's me being a muppet. Yeah, like, but, I've got to have some empathy. That person. Why are they acting like they're acting? Oh, they are incentivized for quality. They are incentivized for, minimizing defects. I'm incentivized pushing out new features. Let's have a conversation. Let's work together. Don't be too quick to judge. Right, quick case study. I'll shout out Nick, who's like there. Hey, Nick. Very, very briefly, I'll just quickly introduce. So I worked quite a bit with Not on the High Street, who are an online marketplace, do some fantastic products. I buy a lot of gifts now. If like you're looking for sort of awesome bespoke gifts from them, please do. We worked with Salesforce for about sort of a year and a half, didn't we? And we basically worked with a team, like fantastic team on the High Street, fantastic technical team. They had a Ruby monolith, which we helped to break down into microservices, lay some of the foundations in Java, in Node, in JavaScript, and also some Ruby services. And I know Nick, hipster as he is, has now introduced Go and Swift as well into the stack. So a whole bunch of cool stuff there. But it was not without its troubles. Ultimately, in terms of like deployment platform, this is what we came up with. We used Mesos at the time, and we used containers. I've sort of put this in as a flavor. Like the more interesting stuff was kind of Nick and I talked about at Container Shed conference last year. So if you have a Google for Not on the High Street Container Shed, you'll see Nick and I talking about these things. But this just gives you an idea of kind of the complexity perhaps of a microservice platform. But the more interesting thing, I know there's one lesson that you took, like, I'm going to share that one. So one thing we learned is if when we were deploying, doing sort of the first rollout of microservices, if you design a process, make sure you use it. Now, like, you're probably best to explain this one, Nick. I don't know, like, would you mind?
This is my favorite slide in the whole world. So we moved over to AWS last year, and we'd spent a whole bunch of time containerizing even our monolith and building out our microservice architecture. We'd done a whole bunch of load balancing on everything, and we were super confident. We were approaching Black Friday. We were also pushing out an advert in the middle of Downton Abbey. So like pretty big prime time slot. So this was the first real test of the new architecture. We were all sitting around on the Slack channel at home, waiting for the Downton Abbey to start looking at the system, looking at the monitoring. Everything looked healthy. Everything was just superb. And then this started to happen. So 9:20, traffic was fairly static, fairly steady. The advert then kicked in, and the traffic started to come in. Now this is the request time and the traffic. So it started to go up. It started to go up. The latency started to go up on the system. Everybody started to look at it and was like, okay, this is okay. It's well within tolerance. We've got within our times. And then all of a sudden, it sort of hit a point, and things started to snap. The services, in terms of the number of connections, started to drop off. We started losing containers in the mesosphere. The alerts were going off everywhere. At first, there was a furious amount of sort of like, what the hell is going on? How are we going to fix this? And then at about 9:40, there was absolute silence. Complete silence from the entire of the tech team. I think we were kind of adjusting at what had happened, and what had actually just happened was we'd had a cascading failure and the entire system had gone down. Now, that was rather uncomfortable, as you can sure imagine. And we looked at this and we were like, well, how can this happen, right? We'd spent the time, we'd done the load testing, everything's perfect, and it still snapped. So there was a little bit of silence. There was a little bit of kind of blame floating around. And then people started digging into the monitoring. And one of the things we were looking at is, I was like, well, hang on a minute. We've got 3 read slaves here for the MySQL database. Why are they not active? Why was only the master getting hit? And then again, there was silence. And one of the ops engineers sort of pipes up and says, it's like, that's always a good start, right? It's like, well, so we were registering the MySQL databases in our console cluster. And we had a fantastic pattern for doing this. So we were storing the config in Git. We had Ansible jobs, which then pushed it into console. So when we were doing the load testing, what we decided to do, in our wisdom, was just directly inject the configuration straight into console. Somebody then did a deployment and wiped out that configuration. So we went from a fully load-tested system, fully stable, to something which was completely useless under load, all because somebody decided to break the process. So that's when I say, like, seriously, if you go to the trouble of designing a process, stick to it. Unless, of course, you want to be the guy or the girl who's making a call to the CEO at 11 o'clock at night, trying to explain where all of that money they've just spent on advertising is gone, and that basically, unless we work through the night, there may or may not be a chance that the system will be up the following morning to take advantage of Black Friday weekend. Seriously, that's not the place to be. Stick to the process.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate that very much. Thank you. So yeah, Nick, very kind of you agreed to come up there. Thanks, Nick. So the good news is we did fix it in time, didn't we? And Black Friday was a success, which is awesome. So for anyone who works in e-commerce will know Black Friday, even in the UK, is a super big deal. So it was an epic journey for all, I think, Nick, wasn't it? Like I learned stacks. I know many of us did in the OpenCredo team. Many of us did it on High Street as well. Docker's now proving itself in production. So Nick is doing a great, basically touring the world at the moment. I met him in I didn't meet you in San Francisco, but I know you're in San Francisco. I met you in Amsterdam last week. Nick is talking about how he's genuinely, he and his team, amazing non-High Street team, are using things like Docker, Mesos, and microservices in production, adding value. So he's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk, which is awesome. So chat to Nick about those things, please do. Packaging, I think like Docker for me is a lot like packaging. That was quite nice. You can package applications much easier, and so experimentation as a business, as a tech team, is much easier as well. And it took us a while, but we got increased harmony between developers and operations. We realized with microservices, with containers, we do have to increase harmony. I know I've talked about it, the perfect world before, but we learned in our journey together that this is really, really important. You have to work very closely, particularly if you're doing a sort of quite fundamental change. So let's wrap this up, because we've only got a few minutes left. These are the things we think are important, from an organizational point of view, from an architectural point of view, and from an operational point of view. And we like products, like I say, we like small cross-functional teams. We do like microservices. They're not a one-size-fits-all, they're not a panacea, but they've got some really cool benefits, We like things like goal-driven technical leadership. This is often the big change to an organization that is used to command and control, for example. But setting incentives, setting goals, setting your sort of values and principles is really valuable. And the kind of the ops side, we like continuous deployment. It's pretty much a prerequisite, I can never say that, prerequisite for microservices. So if you haven't got kind of CI, CD, DevOps, or DevOps kind of concepts, I should say, be conscious that microservices might actually be more work operationally than you're prepared for. And we like people, keep mentioning it, but it's all about the people. I did a blog post actually on the DevOps Enterprise Summit review, and one of the key things I took away from the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London last week is it's like whatever you're doing, be it a startup, be it like a massive enterprise, it's fundamentally all about the people, all about your colleagues, all about the users, those kind of things. I did a talk actually, if you're looking sort of for anti-patterns, like lipstick on the pig is another good one here. So I did a talk at QCon New York, the slides are online. If you want to find out more about anti-patterns and how kind of DevOps and stuff maps into some of these things, I talk more about tooling choices. Check out my SlideShare there. The video is going to be online in a couple of weeks hopefully as well, so check that out as well. I'd love feedback. If you've got different stories or you don't agree with what I say, please do get in contact. That's how I learn. So I love that kind of stuff. These are where I take my inspiration from, these kind of books, yeah. So I'm a big fan of Sam Newman, awesome book. Eberhard Wolf's is more practical focused, talks about Docker, talks about Kubernetes, that kind of thing. You're building APIs, you're thinking about architecture, these books are super useful. From the business side, designing delivery and the art of business value. Small books, but really powerful at sort of understanding the language we may need to use to communicate with the business people, with the C-level, with the middle management. This is really important. And things like agile testing is more and more important. Microservices will put an increased demand on your QA, on your testing team. Like we've seen that pretty much every time. And the DAO of microservices, or Tao of microservices, Richard Rogers working on. Richard's CTO, I think, at Nearform, who do Seneca JS and Node consultancy. He's got some quite nice ideas around the principles, if you like, the ethos of microservices. I haven't got it on this slide, but I'm going to shout out the API Academy team. They did a great conference a couple of weeks ago in New York called API 360, and they're pumping out a lot of cool stuff. They've actually got an O'Reilly book called Microservice Architecture. So it was available last week or something, so if you Google Microservice Architecture O'Reilly, you'll find their book as well. I will add it onto the deck soon. I think on that note, I shall say thank you very much.